Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take that fire hose of information you send us and really distill it down into the knowledge you need.
Today, we are diving into a really sprawling, frankly shocking scandal. It involves federal funds that were meant to protect some of the most vulnerable people in the country.
Yeah, and we're focusing on Minnesota, which has become, well, ground zero for what one U.S. attorney, Joe Thompson, called staggering industrial-scale fraud.
And just to give you a sense of what industrial scale means here, Thompson, who's the first assistant U.S. attorney, he laid out the sheer magnitude of the theft.
The numbers are, they're almost impossible to really wrap your head around. So since 2018, Minnesota has handled about $18 billion in federal funds. That's across 14 different state-run programs.
And Thompson's estimate is that half or more of that might have been stolen.
Half. So you're talking about a potential loss that could easily approach $1 billion. Or even more.
That figure alone should tell you this isn't about petty theft. It's not, just simple overbilling. We're talking about highly organized, even novel criminal enterprises.
What do you mean by novel?
Well, usually prosecutors see like a service provider who inflates an invoice, right? Charges for 10 hours instead of 8. What made these cases in Minnesota so different, so devastating, was the creation of phantom companies.
Phantom companies.
Layers of them, designed to provide absolutely zero services while submitting entirely fake claims to essential programs like Medicaid.
And in human terms, what does that actually mean? It means the safety net is just being hollowed out from the inside.
Exactly. Thompson outlined it perfectly. You have adults leaving addiction treatment who desperately need stable housing, or children with autism who need that intensive one-on-one therapy.
All of those crucial resources are now at risk because the money was just gone.
So our mission today is to unpack this. The mechanics of the theft, the political earthquakes it's triggered, and the very intense scrutiny it has now placed on the state's large Somali American community.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, the origin point. This whole multi-layered investigation, it began with a nonprofit called Feeding Our Future, FOF.
Right. FOF was supposed to feed low-income children during the pandemic. The government waived a lot of rules to get money out fast, but instead it became the country's largest COVID-related fraud scam.
We're talking about $300 million siphoned away, something like 57 defendants convicted.
But here's where the oversight failure gets just wild. In 2021, the Minnesota Department of Education, they got suspicious. They saw these huge red flags and tried to stop paying FOF.
And what happened?
FOF sued the state.
They sued the state. On what grounds?
They alleged racial discrimination. They claimed the state was withholding funds unfairly because they were a minority-run organization.
And a judge actually ordered the state to restart the payments.
Can you believe it? It essentially tied the government's hands, and that allowed the scheme to just explode. It grew by hundreds of millions more before the feds could finally step in.
So that lawsuit gave them a massive, uncontested window to operate. And the FOF case, it wasn't just a standalone thing, was it? It was more like a key.
A skeleton key, really. It unlocked a whole network of other abuses across different social service programs, all of them using that same playbook. Fake companies, fake services.
And that led directly to the autism program investigation.
Absolutely. The early intensive developmental and behavioral intervention benefit. Thompson noted that about 24 of the FOF defendants were also getting money from these autism clinics. They were just hopping from one scheme to the next.
The individual scale of the fraud here is stunning. One woman pleaded guilty to getting $14 million in Medicaid reimbursements for therapy sessions that never happened.
And it gets worse. They charged a new defendant with actively recruiting parents within the Somali community, paying them kickbacks.
Kickbacks? You mean paying parents just to sign their kids up?
Yes. From $300 to $1,500 a month, just to drive up enrollment for these phantom services. That tactic alone led to another $6 million in fake claims.
And you can see it in the budget numbers. The budget for this autism benefit went from $3 million in 2018
to nearly $400 million in 2023.
That's not just growth. That's a fiscal explosion.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how that kind of curve didn't set off every alarm bell in the state government way sooner.
It definitely suggests the state controls were not robust, to say the least. And the pattern just repeats itself. You look at the Housing Stability Services Program.
The one for helping Medicaid recipients find housing.
Right. 5 new defendants were just charged in that one. And this is where we see something the source is called fraud tourism.
Fraud tourism? What is that?
It's exactly what it sounds like. 2 Philadelphia residents were charged. They allegedly came to Minnesota specifically because they saw it as a source of easy money.
So Minnesota's lack of oversight was basically being advertised, a destination for crime.
It seems so. They submitted $3.5 million in fraudulent claims. And the financial shock here was, again, massive. The program was supposed to cost about $2.6 million a year. Last year, it paid out over $100 million.
In that program.
Yeah.
It's been shut down now.
Shuttered entirely. Which means the people who actually needed that housing support, they're left with nothing from that program.
And they're still finding more. Authorities are now looking at a third program, integrated community supports for adults with disabilities.
And you see the same pattern. Payments are projected to hit $180 million this year. Again, exponentially more than when it started in 2021.
It's what led the prosecutor to that terrifying quote. Every day we look under a rock and find a new $50 million fraud scheme.
The complexity, the sheer volume of it all, it really is unprecedented.
Okay, so that massive amount of cash brings us to the next logical question. Where did all the money go? It wasn't just spent on luxury cars here in the U.S., was it?
Oh, not at all. A huge portion of it was wired overseas really fast, and that, of course, makes it much, much harder for the government to ever get it back.
The sources have some pretty specific details on that global money trail. We know funds were used to buy real estate in Nairobi, Kenya,
which is a major hope for the Somali diaspora, and also property on the Mediterranean coast in Alanya, Turkey.
There's some incredible anecdotes. I mean, one FOF defendant spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on an aircraft in Nairobi.
Another one wired $1.5 million to China and Kenya, and then bragged in a text that he'd invested $6 million in Kenya.
Wow. Now, we have to touch on a very sensitive, very politically charged claim that has really come to dominate the discussion around this case.
You're talking about the al-Shabaab question.
Exactly. A conservative news outlet, the City Journal, they made the claim that some of this taxpayer money might have ended up in the hands of the Somali militant group al-Shabaab.
And we have to be extremely precise here because this has fueled a lot of the political rhetoric. First Assistant U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson was very clear. He emphasized that based on their investigations, there is no evidence that the defendants were radicalized.
Or that they were intentionally trying to fund al-Shabaab or any other terrorist group.
Correct. No direct link, no intent established in any of the charges. However, Thompson did concede that money sent to Somalia might have indirectly ended up with the group, just given their influence in the region. And that possibility, even if it's indirect, is enough to keep this a major political talking point.
And that brings us right to the political and community fallout, which has been immense.
A profound crisis, really.
This fraud immediately became a flashpoint in Minnesota politics. Critics, mostly Republicans like Tom Emmer and Jordan Rasmussen, they've called it a catastrophic failure of oversight under the Democratic governor, Tim Walz.
And Rasmussen made a very specific allegation. He said, and I'm quoting, that political correctness halted the Walz administration from investigating these Somali-run nonprofits sooner.
And the critics point to things that seem really obvious in hindsight. You know, sites claiming to feed thousands more kids than actually lived in the area.
So what was Governor Walz's response to all this?
Well, he defended his administration's actions. He said they'd spent years cracking down on fraudsters, that they started an audit, paused some of the high-risk payments, and appointed a director of program integrity to try and fix the system.
The sources seem to frame it as a classic political back and forth. Walz's administration says the critics are just politicizing the issue to defund programs.
Right. But what is very clear is that the federal government did not think the state's response was enough.
And you can see that in the federal enforcement actions, which have been, well, dramatic. The Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, they froze $185 million in federal child care payments to Minnesota.
And they changed the rules for everyone, nationwide. HHS now requires specific proof receipts, attendance records, before releasing funds.
Which proves that the problems in Minnesota's model were seen as a national vulnerability.
Exactly. And the FBI surged personnel to Minnesota to focus just on dismantling these fraud networks. But the biggest impact, arguably, is on the community that's found itself at the center of all this scrutiny.
You're talking about Minnesota's Somali community.
Yeah, which is the largest in the U.S., around 84,000 people. And the U.S. Attorney's Office reports that 82 of the 92 defendants charged across all these schemes are Somali Americans.
And that demographic reality was immediately seized upon by national political figures.
President Trump, for example, capitalized on it, referring to the community as garbage and saying he doesn't want immigrants from East Africa.
And that rhetoric was followed by a pretty unprecedented administrative action. The Trump administration announced it would be auditing immigration cases of U.S. citizens of Somali origin
For what purpose?
to find any kind of fraud that could potentially lead to denaturalization.
Denaturalization. That's the revocation of your citizenship.
Yes. It's an incredibly rare legal action, usually reserved for things like espionage or war crimes or, clear fraud on your initial citizenship application.
So tying it to financial crimes committed after you become a citizen,
Yeah.
that's a serious escalation.
A very severe one. And it's led to significant pushback from the community. Advocates like Keller, Minnesota, are urging people not to generalize the crimes of a few individuals, which they do not defend, to the entire community of 84,000 people.
They're warning about the risk of racial profiling, of civil rights violations. And they're drawing parallels to U.S. history, when crime was associated with entire immigrant groups, like Italian or Irish immigrants, centuries ago.
Their point is that crime is an individual act, regardless of the shared background of the people committing it.
And that really gets to the core tension here. You have billions lost, vital services gone, and this resulting political and social firestorm that's now concentrated on a single immigrant community.
It highlights a massive challenge for government, really.
It's an impossible balancing act.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you meet the critical need to get funds out fast to feed hungry kids during a pandemic while also having these ironclad systems to prevent fraud?
Especially when programs scale up so quickly. It's the classic speed versus security dilemma playing out in real time with catastrophic results.
And while the political rhetoric was ugly, that administrative action auditing citizens for denaturalization, that's a tangible legal step we just haven't seen tied to financial crime before. And that sets up our final thought for you.
The sources note that denaturalization is legally possible if you obtained your citizenship fraudulently. But it's been historically very, very rare. We're talking about 11 cases a year, on average, between 1990 and 2017.
So given the intense federal focus and these new audits specifically targeting U.S. citizens of Somali origin, the question to consider is this. What does this signal about the future application of U.S. citizenship law when it's linked to broad financial crime investigations? Is this the beginning of a new, much more punitive approach?
A critical question for you to ponder.
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.